please welcome the super smart head of smart at British Land, Jules Barker. Welcome.
Thank you very much. That's a bit of an intimidating introduction. Thank you very much. So, I'll talk about three things today. One is what I think smart means, because I am very aware that it's a ridiculous buzzword in the industry, and we really genuinely tried to think of a different job title for me, but couldn't come up with a better one, so we've stuck with it. Two is what British Land is doing in this area, and then I'll leave us all with some thoughts about how, as an industry, we can try and come together to actually progress this and make a bit of change. So, what does it mean? For British Land, smart is about using technology in the built environment to make places outstanding. So some of the things that it's not, that we've heard about today, I'm not focusing on building processes, I'm not focusing on how we build stuff better and quicker and cheaper. I'm focusing on when the building's there, how do we make it an awesome place to be for those of us that work in it, that shop in it, that live in it, but also those people who are responsible for maintaining it and running it, etc., etc. And if you like, what that effectively is digital placemaking. So, what do I mean by digital placemaking? Effectively, I think the property industry has been on a journey over the last 10 or 15 years or so, probably a bit more, in fact. Starting with a focus on the physical, we've all got really good at building awesome buildings in great locations. And then layering on that, you get the focus, the growth of human-centered design, thinking about in those great places, how do you make them great for the people that are in them? How do you make them great from a perspective of well-being and community? And then the digital is the next step in that journey. How do you use technology to actually bring those places alive so that we can engage with them seamlessly? And that's why it's digital placemaking. And similar to the similar to the concept of placemaking, which is, in my mind at least, it's an activity, a capital activity where you spend money and you don't get day one income, but you do it because it makes the place awesome, and then more people want to rent it, and then the value goes up, which is, you know, after all, what a property developer and landlord actually does. So as an example, like planting trees, we planted a lot of trees at Paddington a few years ago, and there was a big debate about that, as you can imagine at the time. Do we want to spend all this money planting trees? But actually, we've been really happy with the result, because the result is it's a much better place to be. People want to go there, and it's a strongly performing location now as a result of it. But the day we finished planting the trees, it wasn't like we put an extra floor on one of the buildings and we're immediately getting more rent. And that is a lot of what this kind of activity is about. It's the long-term activity of making awesome places. So why are we doing it? I've probably covered half this slide already, but there are four groups essentially that I think that we're benefiting here. One is the occupiers. Those are the people that pay rent. This is about making places more efficient so that the costs are lower in managing the space, but it's also about making brand-enhancing locations that attract and retain talent by making great places to work, which kind of takes you on to the next group, which is the customer. Those are the people that live, that work, that shop in those places. And for them, it's all about well-being, it's all about productivity. How do you integrate seamlessly with your own space? The third one then is British Land. I've kind of mentioned this already, and unfortunately, we're not doing this solely for altruistic reasons. This is for us, we believe it's a strategic differentiator for us. We believe it's a way of communicating to the market and to the people that want to rent space from us about what we're doing and how we're different. But it also allows us to get much, much closer to our customers, which we believe is really, really important. The days of a landlord going to an occupier, renting 4 concrete walls, and then disappearing off skiing for 20 years and then coming back is completely gone. We need to be much closer to understand what all our customers and our occupiers really want. And then, of course, we believe that by doing that, it'll deliver better rents, which is what our shareholders want. Then lastly, but absolutely by no means leastly, in fact, probably the most important, it's important for society. We've heard a little bit already today about the kind of things that you can do to make more sustainable spaces by using different building materials like bamboo, which we've also been, obviously not building with yet, but exploring how we might be able to do that sort of thing. You can do a lot with that, but actually, you can only make buildings truly sustainable. You can only really reach the pinnacle of sustainability in buildings if you deploy technology in them to make them run more efficiently. And also, the community aspect. Again, we're very keen on creating a sense of community in our buildings and in our spaces, our campuses, and technology is one of the tools that you can use to actually bring that alive. Fundamentally, though, I would assert that the reason this stuff is important, because demand is growing from all of us, and I suspect in this room I'm probably preaching to the choir, but even for those outside the room, demand is growing from all of us for more connected, more seamless space. If you think about how your home has changed in the last few years, let alone 10 or 15 years, the power that technology is giving us with Nest so that you can monitor and economize your heating over time, with smart TVs with millions of films at your fingertips, with Ring doorbells so that you can monitor your property for its security remotely, and things like Alexa so that you can command all of this with your voice. Things have changed totally. We have power and we have control over our home in a way that we never used to. And then compare that to the typical office. This is actually from the 1980s. This is over 30 years ago, but it probably, I would assert, hasn't changed for many of us. And I think we're all beginning to react against going back in time when we go to work. So, what is British Land actually doing? We're working across these three pillars here. What is the hardware? What do I mean by that? The hardware is things like the M&E equipment in the building. It's network, it's connectivity, but it's also things like lifts and HVAC air conditioning systems, and also the sensors you put in the buildings. We're working to make sure that the data that they all give off is formatted in a uniform way so that we can gather it together into a single data environment and then reverse that data flow so that we can control and actuate change over those systems remotely. I've kind of mentioned the data environment. We, for several years, have had a data environment that we've been using to gather things like footfall data and retail sales data so that we can understand the performance of our retail estate. And we're now upgrading that so that we can allow two-way, real-time processing of building systems data. And that'll allow us to understand what's going on in those buildings, all of those buildings together, and compare them all to each other. And I'll come back in a second to why that's important. And then, as I said, actuate change in them. To begin with, that change is going to be driven by humans, by people looking at the data, understanding what's going on, and sending command instructions. But relatively quickly, this will need to be driven by AI. And then the third bit is user experience. We're also working at dashboards and apps and talking to some of the people in this room about that to enable users to understand what's going on in their space, in their place, and then control it. Things like I want people working at Broadgate to be able to access their space seamlessly. I want them to be able to, on one app, be able to book meeting rooms, to be able to find a desk, to find their colleagues, to be able to have a coffee delivered to their desk, to be able to engage in the local events and clubs and societies and things that exist in the space of Broadgate, which is one of our campuses. So that's the kind of thing that we're doing. How does this actually work in practice? So a case study of 100 Liverpool Street, which is a building that will complete in about 5 or 6 months' time in Q1 next year. Excuse me. And we're embedding that kind of approach that I've just talked about throughout that building. So in terms of hardware, we've specified that the hardware in the base build will communicate using the protocols that we have set out, and it's got best-in-class network and connectivity, and it's got room for growth in that also. And then that hardware will be communicating into a standalone data environment, which will then cross over into a larger British Land data environment in the near future. And in terms of user experience, we've commissioned bespoke dashboards and control software, as you'd expect from a brand new building. And then the trials that we're running elsewhere for other dashboards and for apps and things will import across into 100 Liverpool Street and the rest of Broadgate and indeed our other campuses when they're ready. A point to pause on 100 Liverpool Street is that we commissioned it in 2016, which means, of course, we started thinking about it way before 2016, and it doesn't complete, as I said, for another 6 months. That's over 3 years from commissioning, let alone from ideation, if that's a real word. That's obviously a lifetime in tech, and so what we have tried to do is devise a modular approach, the kind of thing that I've just been talking about, so that you can plug in and out seamlessly whatever is best in class at that point in time. We don't want to be stuck with one system that is monolithic and cannot move, because it's going to be out of date very, very quickly. So that's 100 Liverpool Street with what it'll look like in sort of a year or so, 6 months to a year. What does the longer term look like? What is my vision for how I think smart can make spaces awesome? This is a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I'll go through it. So there's some stuff that we're already doing. So visitor management, we have a thing called world-class welcome. So if you're a visitor to one of our buildings, you will, the night before at about 6 o'clock, get emailed a visitor pass, and that will give you instructions on how to get there, and it'll also mean that you can access through the barriers via a barcode on the digital email. You can save that barcode to your Apple Wallet, so it will spontaneously pop up when you come within the Wi-Fi zone, and it'll tell you, so rather than have to go through and give your name, it'll say, in our headquarters building, for example, swipe through the barrier, come up to the 3rd floor, and that's where you'll be greeted. Similarly, I, as your host, would know automatically, I will get an email once you've swiped through to know that you've arrived. Similarly, sensors. So this is something that we are also beginning, and we're working on. There's a lot of improvement that we can do in this, but what we've done is we've installed sensors, space utilization sensors that look like that in our building, and we're using them to understand in detail how we use our space and how, therefore, we can improve it. And we've now started as well, we've signed our first occupier to work with, so one of our occupiers, who I can't tell you who they are, I'm afraid, but you just have to take my word for it, that we've signed a deal with them, so we are installing sensors in their space as well, and we're using this as part of a conversation that we're having with them about how to re-gear their space. We've been talking for a while about how could they do things differently. They're interested, for example, in taking less space, as many people are, and we want to actually help them with this, which seems super counterintuitive for a landlord, but we have a vision of being able to take an occupier and say to them, let's work out together exactly how you're using your space, and then we'll give you the perfect space for you. So, for example, do you really need a massive boardroom? How often do you use it? Oh, it turns out you use it once a month. Well, don't have a massive boardroom then. We will put a really awesome boardroom in your building, and everyone can share it, and then you can pay per use for that. Do you really need 30 meeting rooms, 20 meeting rooms, whatever it is? No, maybe you need 5 meeting rooms because you use them all the time, and then you want to share the others. Do you really need a massive auditorium? No, well, maybe you just need one auditorium on Broadgate, and then you can all buy into it. And so that's where we're trying to go with this, and we've signed our first occupier that we're working with on that conversation. I've spoken a little bit about apps. In the next 12 months, we want to have rolled out user experience apps across all of our various campuses, and they'll do this sort of stuff. So I want you to, as I said, be able to order lunch, join the local running club because no one in your office wants to go running at the lunchtime at the speed you run at or whatever it might be. Control the environment, so being able to turn up and down the temperature in your meeting rooms, being able to book the meeting rooms, etc., and then things like community, etc. Then there's the longer term stuff, and control the meeting room. It's a bit misleading, I suppose, isn't it? Because I've already talked about that. But what I meant by this is AI. I want then the kind of things that we're going to look at in the longer term is machine learning to control and optimize space for you. And that goes back to the sustainability point. That's the only way we're going to create truly sustainable buildings. And then things like voice control in meeting rooms, which is an interesting topic because it really scares some people and other people think it's really awesome. So we're going to have to tread quite carefully and slowly towards what that actually looks like. And my experience of things like Alexa at home is that it is nowhere near good enough yet to be able to take minutes, for example, from meetings, which is one of the ways that it would be useful. But that's the kind of vision of where I think this is going. So, I've no idea how I'm doing for time, but I'm nearly done. The last point then I would leave you on is one of scale. So there's a lot of benefit in smart in a single building. You can make the environment more personalized for individuals. You can give us all, as people who work in offices and shop in shops, more control over the environment. You can make that building more efficient by applying artificial intelligence to understand what's going on, so you don't have that fan unit heating and that one cooling the space at the same time, which is, as I'm sure many of us will know, a depressingly common occurrence. You can do that sort of stuff. There is a second level benefit, though. If you're not just using one building and you're doing it in a campus of buildings, then you can improve, particularly the user experience, you can improve even further. And then British Land has another advantage of having a load of different space all across London, and that is another advantage because it means we've got much bigger data sets to work with. But, and this is the point I'd like to leave you with, I don't think that's enough either. I think as an industry, we need to come together to take it beyond that picture, which we flatter ourselves is relatively big, but is absolutely minuscule in the scale of the built environment globally. And we need to come together to work out how we can all work together to share data, to understand what good really looks like and what can be improved. And I think, I don't know, is Patrick still here? Is he gone? I'm not sure. But what he was talking about earlier, I think, is really, really important. People like the BPF, but with all of us getting on board together to work out how do we do that? How do we actually take all these different data sets and enable them to compare them to each other? And that's where I think we need to go with it. And that's my piece. Thank you very much.